Okay. I was saying before, one day we'll have a tech person who can run everything. But grateful for what we have right now. So today we're jumping into Ecclesiastes chapter 8. I've done this every time. I'm trying to make it shorter and shorter. But as people tune in, especially online, I feel like it's useful to not leave them in the dark. Because if you hear the book of Ecclesiastes, if you hear some things I'm about to say, they sound like really awful. So somebody could be like, what? If you are quoting something that is surprising, I think it's always good to let the audience in on it. So we're talking about, the author of Ecclesiastes is never quite stated, but we think that it was most definitely Solomon. Some people are like, yeah, it definitely was. Some people are like, no, it couldn't have been. I lean towards it was Solomon. What's that?
It was the Lord anyway.
That's right. Yeah, it was inspired. It was God that was inspiring the writer. And so we see in this book somebody who has done it all, has been everywhere. When I give these Bible studies, I'm almost like embarrassed because I will talk about in the art world how I've had the ability to overlap a lot of different people. And it sounds like I go home, I'm like, does that sound like name dropping? But the only way I can underscore what the author is saying is that, like, I've been surprised in the art world that I always dreamed of attaining a certain level and mixing with a certain crowd, and because then you succeed as an artist. And I get to that level and I go home and I'm like, well, that was a letdown. And a lot of the people that you meet that you admire, and from a distance, you're like, wow, they have it all together. A couple that were madly in love and they were on the front cover of magazines. And I went home and I was like, wow, like they have it all together. They have all the money. They're very famous. He's a super celebrity. And then 2 months later, they were divorced, in a horrific divorce too. So it's just this whole idea of kind of the letdown that life can offer you. So, hi Elaine, how are you? So the author has been let down by many things. He's been let down by external things. So he's been let down by, he starts out with, he's like, I'm going to learn as much as I can. The second thing is, I'm going to throw myself into building things and architecture and making a name for myself. And the third thing is, those things didn't work. I'm just going to really enjoy myself. I'm going to laugh. I'm going to collect art. I'm going to have music. Let down, let down, let down, let down. And then he gets to the place where he's then let down by other people. And then he's let down by himself. And every which way he's turning, he's just finding that life is letting him down. And what's the reason for that? Well, he has a refrain that he repeats all the time. He says, and I looked under the sun. And so, we always think of, have you ever seen in Central Park the horses with the blinders? Like, they could be really narrow like that. Well, he has blinders like this. And he's looking like that. And only momentarily will he lift it off. And he says, there's a God. And you know what? I must not be seeing the entire picture. So God has it under control, but I can't quite figure out how. And then the blinders go back on, So that's where we're at right now in Ecclesiastes chapter 8. So let's just jump right into the text. And does somebody want to read? Let's do this tonight. Let's read verses 1 through 9, which there's a lot there. And then we're going to double back. And we're just going to go verse by verse. So does somebody want to read Ecclesiastes chapter 8, verses 1 through 9?
Ken?
Cool.
So not starting at the obey the king thing.
Um,
Earlier than that.
What's that?
Or just at the chapter 8?
Yeah, just right at chapter 8.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
Who is like the wise? Who knows the explanation of things? A person's wisdom brightens their face and changes its hard appearance. Obey the king's command, I say, because you took an oath before God. Do not be in a hurry to leave the king's presence. Do not stand up for a bad cause, for he will do what he pleases, whatever he pleases. Since a king's word is supreme, who can say to him, what are you doing? Whoever obeys his command will come to no harm, and the wise heart will know the proper time and procedure. For there is a proper time and a procedure for every matter, though a person may be weighed down by misery. Since no one knows the future, who can tell someone else what is to come? As no one has the power over the wind to contain it, so no one has the power for the time of their death. As no one is discharged in the time of war, so wickedness will not release those who practice it. All this I saw, as I applied my mind to everything done under the sun. There is a time when a man lords it over others to his own hurt.
Yeah. So, just opening it up, the whole thing from verse 1 through 9, if anyone sees anything, you can jump right in. Or if you have any questions.
He means the human king, right? He's not like making an analogy to God.
Doesn't seem like he is. It's a great question because we always have to think the Bible can have, one thing can be true, and then it has two applications, but it doesn't seem like here at all it's referring to like a divine king who is good. It seems like a capricious king that is someone who you have to tread on eggshells with, because they're fickle. So, yeah. Well, I'll just jump right into the first verse by saying that the preceding chapter, we see that the author was very let down by women. And so you could immediately feel, if you're a woman sitting here, you could be like, oh, that's like kind of harsh. But it's because his heart was really wrong towards women. If this is Solomon writing this, he had 700 wives and 300 concubines. And he was always going to women looking for an answer. He was looking for the answer. And so Chris was hilarious last time because I was talking about how if we're going to a spouse looking for the answer in the other person, we're going to be profoundly let down. Hey, John. We're going to be profoundly let down because our true meaning has to come from a higher thing. And if we're looking if I'm looking to my wife, Margaret, and she has to provide all my meaning in life, I am going to suffocate her. And then I will ultimately be disillusioned because she's going to let me down because all of my meaning is not in my wife. So Chris was so funny last time. He was like, you need your own Hallmark section of greeting cards at the stationery store. We're like, you're not my all in all. You're not my everything. I thought that was so funny. But really, like when in the preceding chapter, in chapter 7, when he identifies that women had let him down, as he went to them with, his heart was in the wrong place. The thing that we find is if we have our relationships in the proper place, where vertically first, our answers are taken care of and we know who we are in Christ, then ironically, when we take the pressure off of our loved ones and say like, you're not my reason for being alive, you can actually have a better relationship. It actually can deepen your love because you've taken the pressure off of them. They were never intended to be the thing that you were hoping them to be, right? So the author doesn't quite get this. So he's let down again previously by his relationships. And now we fast forward and he kind of like, he's entering into another thought. He says, who is like the wise? And who knows the interpretation of the thing? So he's pausing, we're in a new thought, and he says, it's true that the wise individual carries themselves differently through this life. Who is like the wise is a deep statement in that like, it's saying like, is there anybody to be likened to the wise? Is there anybody that can be like seen as having the same qualities? I'm sure you all have people in your life that you could think of that are utter fools. Everything they touch, they destroy. There's a general part of the population that kind of just saunters along, but then there's certain people that really stand out as having like just the hallmark of wisdom in everything that they touch and all their dealings. That's what he's saying right here. Who is like the wise? It's a really beautiful like pause. And then he says, and who knows the interpretation of a thing? So we know that the Bible over and over again, it will say in different passages, it'll say, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of all wisdom. And I've had hard times in my life, things where I was going through something pretty difficult. And there's a man in my life, he was my history teacher when I was in grade school. And I go back to him. And he's someone who's just walked close with God. And as he's walked close with God, the amazing thing is that he exudes a wisdom. Every business he puts his hand to, everything he touches, he brings into it a wisdom. He opened up a Greek restaurant, and he failed utterly. He put a lot into it, and he failed utterly. And you know what he said when he was done opening that Greek restaurant? This wise man, this history teacher, he said, God had me open up the restaurant. It was the dream of my lifetime, so that I could fail, so that I could realize that I was never intended to open a Greek restaurant. And he's a very gifted cook. And so he just folded up and moved on, resumed teaching history, and went on to open other restaurants with other people that were fantastically successful. But it's just someone who's just like, I gave it my all, and I'm just moving on. And I go to this man because he's been able to speak into my life. And so I could say, who is like the wise? Who is like that man to me? And then it says, and who knows the interpretation of a thing? So if somebody could turn to 1 Chronicles 12:32.
Darn it, I went to Corinthians.
12:32. And if somebody wants to read just that one verse, it seems obscure, but I'll bring it around.
Of the sons of Issachar, who had understanding of the times to know what Israel ought to do, their chiefs were 200, and all their brethren were at their command.
Yeah, so it says right here, of Issachar, that is a tribe of Israel, men who had understanding of the times to know what Israel ought to do. So this passage, I won't go through the whole thing, but David has become king of Israel, and he has a motley crew of vagabonds and people who are, hurting and disillusioned and rough around the edges, and they followed him in David's dark period of persecution, and now David is king. And then every ruler needs a cabinet, every ruler needs, a body, and so who would David look to as he ran his kingdom? And it says, of Issachar, men who had understanding of the times to know what Israel ought to do. It's literally listed as a characteristic that helped to guide the nation. And this is what Solomon is referring to. So again, if it is Solomon, this is Solomon's father, who relied on men who could, let's flip back to Ecclesiastes, and who knows the interpretation of a thing. So he's placing this high premium on a wise person who can really interpret the times and what's going on. And then the next portion says, a man's wisdom makes his face shine, and the hardness of his face is changed. Does anyone want to jump into that? It's such a cool verse.
What page are we on in this one? Sorry, I was just about to say.
Here, I'll flip to it. So go for it, Evan.
A person's, because with wisdom there's hope. Because without wisdom, like a folly, like everything they do, like kind of fails, I suppose. Like full, like everything just passes away quickly. But wisdom creates something that is lasting. Like knowledge is like deep knowledge that's lasting.
Yeah.
So there's hope there.
Yeah.
Not entire hope, because wisdom is not the end, but there is more hope of like.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's internal, right?
I was going to say, yeah, it's like, right along with yours, it's like wisdom causes in a problem, in a situation, for the light to go on, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like my friend who put his hand to certain things in life, and they just totally collapsed. He was just like, oh, all right, and he carries on. And it's funny because when you see him, he just like walks along, and he has this way of walking, and literally the way he carries himself when he like bumbles along and walks, he looks joyful. And it's in his demeanor. So we go over their house for dinner every so often, and I bring the fiddle, and it's always like the best time at the contests, right? And it's because the hardness that could have been there, let's say when he was younger and he didn't know God, it's been totally displaced. And he's just someone who just exudes this wisdom. So even he's gone through difficult things that I'm not mentioning in life. And I would see him, and he even still, his face like radiated. So we can think of a couple passages in the Bible where someone's face radiated. So I'll tell you a funny story. If you go to Rome and you look at the statue carved by Michelangelo of Moses, and Moses is there like this, and he's like a bodybuilder from Venice Beach, California, and he's like looking out. And he has these horns coming out, and I actually think it's a beautiful sculpture. I really love it. I have to make fun of Michelangelo. But he has these horns coming out of his head. And I was like, what on earth? Why does Moses have horns? Somebody back in that day translated one word wrong in the Old Testament. So it says that Moses would go up Mount Sinai, and that when he came down, he had the Shekinah glory on him. And so the Shekinah glory was literally, I'll just say it this way, his proximity to God's presence literally infused his face with a shining light. And so when he came down from the mount, the people were scared of him. When you spend time alone with God repeatedly and you're in his presence, you can't help. It's nothing you can manufacture. It's going to make its way into your face. But he radiated so much that they actually asked him to put a veil over his face. So they mistranslated one word, Shekinah, and they said that wasn't the glory of God's radiance. It was horns coming out of his head. So it's like, I don't know, just a funny little piece of trivia. Can we think of another instance where someone's face shone in the Bible? Can anyone think of it?
Transfiguration.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. The Transfiguration, where all of a sudden his clothes were like dazzling white and his face was shining. Anyone think of another one that's a beautiful passage on this? So when Stephen was going to be martyred, Stephen, he's one of my favorite people in the whole Bible. I have to say, if I have a rank order, Stephen's at the top, because he just waited on tables in the early church, and he didn't need, like, I always laugh when I see these meetings. I'll see them on TV sometimes, and it says, His Most Holy, Most Very Reverend High Emperor of this church, Cardinal. And I don't mean to mock high church, because I know that there are churches, and I don't want to make fun of churches, but sometimes just like, it takes 5 minutes to get to the guy, Jeff. Like, all right. But Stephen waited on tables in the early church. And when he was standing up for the gospel and people were opposed to him and he was being put to death, it says that his face shone. Does anyone remember the exact words? I think it shone like that, like an angel. Yeah, we read that in the book of Acts. So again, it's this whole idea of a hardened face having like light come into it. And we had come here to the studio, come here to the church, Jack Barsky. So Jack Barsky was a KGB spy who was planted in the United States. You can look him up. He's on 60 Minutes. You can look him up all over YouTube. Jack Barsky was from the KGB, planted in the 1980s in the United States to really be a part of the demolition of our country. He was reconnaissance, he gathered information, and he would feed it back to the Kremlin. So he came from East Germany and was in the New York City. The FBI never caught him, and he was moving all around in society, and he's feeding all secrets about the early hours of Microsoft and computers. And here he is, this hardened, atheistic Marxist who's set on destroying the United States. And I'm going to fast forward through his story and say that he came to an awareness that God was real, but he didn't know God. He just was like, there must be a God. And I'm fast forwarding again, and he's in an office, and a woman is in his office, and her face was filled with joy. And he's like, I don't know what this woman has that I don't have. But he was really depressed. He was just severely down. And I'm compressing his story. He defects from the KGB. He becomes an American citizen. He works for the FBI. He meets this woman and he sees Jesus in her. And the woman irritated him. It was his employee. And she was like, she would talk to him, and she said, you know, if I come and work for you, Jack, the one thing I have to say is I'm also going to Bible school to get a certificate. And he was so annoyed as an atheist. He was like, all right, whatever, but your face is shining. Like, he thought it. He goes, can you ever share with me about the Bible? So while they were in the office, he would sit with this woman, and she would share from the Bible about what she was reading, and Jack became a Christian. And so a hardened atheist Marxist becomes a Christian through the light shining through a woman's face. It's so beautiful. So Jack would later go on to marry that woman. So the story ends really well. The hardness of his face is changed. Now let's jump forward to verse 2. Keep the king's command. So this is a little bit tricky, this passage. And if your Bible has notes on it, it might say what my Bible says right down here. The Hebrew, as it's structured, it's open to interpretation a few different ways, in that there weren't necessarily like the commas that we have. There weren't necessarily, like the vowels that we have and things of that sort. So this could be read two ways. I say, keep the king's command because of God's oath to him. Or it's just as valid to say, keep the king's command because of your oath to God. So I kind of think it's cool that it can go both ways, because as we read this, why is it that we why is it that we keep the laws of our land here in the United States of America? Like, why is it? Anyone want to jump in?
Keep them what?
Why do we keep laws? Like, why do we abide by the laws, generally speaking?
This is not chaos.
So it's not chaos. We know from looking at history, the moment we descend into anarchy, I mean, everything starts collapsing, right? We all want society to be law-abiding. I was amazed when I worked at the jails with maximum security inmates, a lot of MS-13 gang members. The issue of violence in their neighborhood came up, and guess what they said? That they wanted more cops on the street so that their grandmothers and their mothers and their little sisters were safe. I was like, you're an MS-13 gang member. And they're like, yeah, but there are bad guys out there.
They came for people too, it may seem,
Yeah.
But, like the word says in Romans, that the law was established to, restrain evil.
Exactly, yeah, that's exactly it. And I love it, Ingrid, that's my next note to jump over to in Romans. The law is established to restrain evil. But here's the thing, when you take out our oath, so it says, because of your oath to God, when you take out the oath to God, the relationship with law becomes tenuous. And I'm not saying that people who aren't Christians are lawless, because that's not true. They could be more lawful than me. But across the broad fabric of society, when you have everyone just believing that there is no God, then really the only thing that you have guiding you is fear of authority. That's it. You don't really follow the law because you love Vladimir Lenin. You just think, if I don't follow his law, I'm going to go, to a gulag and I'm going to get killed. You don't follow the law because, you're so filled with like warm, cuddly feelings for your leader. It just becomes compulsion. But right here, if we have an oath to God, and then we want to go disobey our leader, whoever's elected, then we have to answer to God. God's not okay with us as citizens just flagrantly disregarding the law. And that's why the early Christians actually they were a threat to the Roman leaders, but the Romans also have letters that go back and forth to each other, where you can actually see one Roman ruler writing to another Roman ruler saying, those Christians are really good and law-abiding. They're outstanding citizens, and whenever there's a plague, they're the only people that are, my words, boots on the ground, helping the people who are sick and dying. I actually read that letter recently. So when you make an oath to God, the consequence is that you keep the laws in a really beautiful way. But now what happens if the laws of men cause you to violate your oath to God? That's where we as Christians, that's where we go to the Colosseum and we're torn apart by lions. That's where in Germany, the Stasi would come in and forget it. You were a Christian, you were done. The Czech Republic, the Czechoslovakia, all through Soviet Union, Mao Zedong's communist China, if you professed that you were a Christian, the rulers knew that you were obeying a higher order. And so that's where as Christians, we can say to our rulers, like, we are your best citizens. Like, we are here to serve and to be pillars within your society. But here's a line, and you cross over it, and we have to obey God and not you. And that's when we start to become persecuted. And it's a scary thing. And I honestly, I'm just going to be forward and saying, I think I can see the whispers of something on the horizon of people saying to us, you know, don't bow down to your God, but bow down to us. And I'll wrap up with this thought before we go over to Romans. The Pantheon in Rome, you know about the Pantheon in Rome, don't you?
The Pantheon. Sounds familiar.
Yeah, so it's the Pantheon in Rome. It's beautiful. I've been there a number of times. Where you go down a Roman street, you see a really noble American institution on this one side in this plaza. It's called McDonald's. You can go and you can get yourself a Big Mac, and then over here is the Pantheon.
Oh, is the one with the circular top?
Yeah.
It's just like a tiny hole.
The tiny little Oculus at the top.
Oh.
But it's just so funny. You walk, you can get yourself a Big Mac and eat it in the Pantheon. It's just, sorry. But the Pantheon, it was built as an attempt by the Romans to harmonize all of the gods of the land. And so all the gods had their little niches inside of the Pantheon. So if you're worshiping Zeus, that's your spot. If you're over here, you're over, like, whatever your God is, we got him, right? And then the Christians, they said, you can bring your Jesus and you can put him there. The Christians said, actually, no. Jesus is not on par with all of your gods. And the Romans were like, and on top of it, Roman emperor, we don't even think you're a god. And the Romans were like, and it was at that point that the Christians were severely persecuted. Not that point alone, but we wouldn't allow our oath to God to be transgressed, you know? And we see this all through the Jewish writings, beautiful passages where the Jews refused to bow down when they were told to bow down to other gods. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were like, not gonna do it. We're not gonna do it. So,
About this whole paragraph here, and Matt had said,
Yeah, go for it.
It's not about Christ at all. It's about our ruler and just keeping what you're saying, laws to keep him to.
yep,
But I don't know. I don't want to, like, when I read this is assuming that this king is a good person.
that's the problem. That's the problem.
You know, so I'm saying,
Yeah.
okay, pay attention. Don't ask him what to do, but like, what if there is a king who says, yes, I believe, but everything he shows does not follow God or Christ? Then
You're-
you're just supposed to say, hey,
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
obeying him because that's what, you know, I'm just to say, it's like very, like, I don't really agree with it.
Yeah, I
Unless
don't.
I'm reading it wrong.
I don't think he agrees. I don't think he, the author, I don't think he really agrees with his object, because it's a dance.
Yeah.
You're
Okay.
dealing with fallen,
So it was okay that I was
fickle
feeling that a
rulers.
little bit. I don't-
I actually think it's the intention, it's the tension that he scripts into here.
Yeah.
He builds that tension in. Did you have a thought on that?
No, that's accurate, because, you know,
Yeah.
the whole thing has been about his, you know, the unfairness, the unbalance of everything.
Right,
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're literally agreeing with the author, who's just like,
yeah.
and so,
Throughout this, has been kind of optimistic, pessimistic, right?
Yeah, very.
Trying to, yeah, okay.
yeah, he's hurting.
Right.
This is someone who's very smart. They don't take anything at face value. They think it through, and he's thinking through, and he's in pain. Like, the author is in pain. That's why I really love this book. Sometimes people are like, oh, it's there to just discard. It's like, no, like, this is the aching. Like, I read a fair amount of like modern philosophy. Now, I don't get too far into it, but like, because I want to know the pain that some people go into. And yeah, I won't go too far down that road, but I want to know the lie that they may have believed, so that perhaps I can come alongside of it with something biblical that's, you know, uplifting and true. And that's what he's doing. So let's jump over to Romans chapter 13. And let's read Romans chapter 13. Can somebody read verses 1 through 7?
Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, Whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from fear or of the one in authority? Then do what is right, and you will be commended. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good, but if you do wrong, be afraid. For rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. Therefore, it is necessary to submit to the authorities, not only because of possible punishment, but also as a matter of conscience. This is why also you pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servants who give their full time to governing. Give to everyone what you owe them. If you owe them taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor.
A hard passage for contemporary United States, right? Like, we, what's that?
I said, we're far from this now, the first part about, the lawlessness and
Yeah,
the fear of God has been taken away.
yep. The fear of God's been taken, and again, it goes back to that oath before God, right? And so Paul is exhorting us to obey our leaders, right? And then we won't go too far into what Paul is saying here, except you can see the spirit of what he's saying, because when Jesus was approached and they said, should you pay taxes or not? And we won't go into the whole story, but he says, give to Caesar. Whose face is on this coin? Give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and give to God the things that are God's. And as Christians, when we believe that we're aligned right here, and we're praying to God, there's a beautiful passage. Actually, I forget the specific passage where it is, but it says, the heart of the king is in the hands of the Lord, and he directs it whatsoever way he will. It's one of my favorite verses for like the moment we're in politically. If you are praying and lifting things up to God and you say, God, I'm grieving, this country is going in a bad direction, this, that, like the other thing. And then you get to that passage, it says, the heart of the king is in the hands of the Lord, and he turns it whatsoever way he will. Then you say, I trust in you, God. I trust in you. And you become more prayerful. And of course, we were talking before about what happens when you have to violate your oath to God. Paul would agree with this. Well, then you don't obey man. And ultimately, many of the disciples went to their death, right? We could go play by play through it, but they wouldn't turn their backs on God, even though they were commanded to. So let's jump back to Ecclesiastes chapter 8, verse 3. Does someone want to read verse 3?
Do not be hasty to go from his presence. Do not take your stand in an evil cause, for he does whatever he pleases. Just 3?
Yeah.
What was that again? Where, chapter?
Ecclesiastes chapter 8, verse 3.
Verse 3? Okay.
Yeah, so I'll read it again. Be not hasty to go from his presence. Do not take your stand in an evil cause, for he does whatever he pleases. Now, this ruler has been set up. Let's say you are someone who's like, you're dealing with the ruler. What I see here is, as you're dealing with the fickleness of erratic rulers, like let's say, be very deliberate. Don't be cavalier and capricious and blow the whole thing up and just like, I'm just walking away from the whole thing. Think of the number of times that men of God in the Bible, women of God in the Bible that were in positions of authority, and they were able to affect something for God's like highest will. So Joseph was the second in command of all of Egypt. If you're the second in command of all of Egypt, there has to be a lot of dark stuff going on. But he wasn't hasty in removing himself, from the Pharaoh, but he was faithful in the position that he was given. And as a consequence of that, in his faithful stewardship of his position, he was able to save millions of people from starving to death, because he had the foresight through prophecy, right? There are so many instances, and I don't need to give them all, but I see right here it says, be not hasty, but be measured, deliberate. I wrote down not impulsive or rash, even if there is a just cause. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit. For the word of the king is supreme, and who may say to him, what are you doing? There are those in authority who is it's difficult, they're unquestionable, and they're rash, right? And whatever they say, it's the end of your career. It could be the end of your life. Whoever keeps a command will know no evil thing, and the wise heart will know the proper time and the just way. That verse for me is the key to this passage right here. To everything that we do with people in authority over us, there's a right time. There's a right way of approaching it. We know this in like marriage, in relationships. There's a way of telling your wife that she has food caught in between her teeth, and there's a way of not telling, like you don't in the middle of a dinner party, like, so obviously I'm joking. What's that? No. I'm just saying, there's a way to handle anything having to do with authorities over us. And if he's giving us very practical advice, as you're dealing with these fickle rulers, don't be caught in anything evil. It says, do not take your stand in an evil cause. It's easy to get wrapped up in evil things when you're moving at high levels of politics. He says, don't get wrapped up in that. And then further on it says, and if you do have a contention, don't just throw your hands in the air and let the whole thing collapse. A wise heart will know the proper time and the just way. You don't know that God may use a wicked ruler and turn his heart. And we see this over and over again in Scripture, where there are wicked rulers that were actually agents of God. Hard to understand.
Is it Nebuchadnezzar?
Yeah. Yep, Cyrus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's funny too, because when God used another nation to bring, correction, if that nation got haughty about it,
Yeah.
God would punish them.
Yeah. Just you wait, yeah.
Just you wait now, okay.
Yeah, don't let it go to your head.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so whenever we're in a position of power, to move forward with like the humility of like, well, I've been invested with this position for now, but my head might be the next on the chopping block if I get arrogant. That's what happened to, it was Nebuchadnezzar, right? Am I remembering correctly? Which ruler went insane for a period of time?
Oh,
Nebuchadnezzar.
Yeah, it was
Because
Nebuchadnezzar.
Daniel told him that he
Yes.
would need to eat. Like,
Yep.
Yeah, like all, I don't know. He would need to eat
Vegetarian,
with the pigs.
right?
I think Daniel was the one that was vegetarian, but I think Daniel told Nebuchadnezzar that he would need to like eat with the beasts for like 7
Yeah,
years or
Yeah,
something.
because the dream, he interpreted the dream.
yeah. And he said, if you get proud, you're going to be eating with the beasts of the field.
And he did, because he made the statue all gold.
Yep. Yeah.
He says, well, I'll take care of that.
Yeah, it's not just the head of the statue that's gold, the whole thing's in, yeah. So again, it goes back to this whole idea of rulers. The author is saying it's hard to navigate relationships, it's hard to navigate this. Now he's saying right here, it's hard to navigate rulers. Verse 6, for there is a time and a way for everything, although man's trouble lies heavy on him. So there's a time and a way to handle all these delicate matters in our dealings with other people around us, men and women in power around us. Although man's trouble, it can also say man's evil lies heavy on him. The difficulty is right in front of us. For he does not know what is to be, for who can tell him how it will be? This is a man looking under the sun, saying, you can be discreet, you can be diplomatic and clever politically, but you don't know what's on the horizon. And you might have a body blow coming, and you don't even know it. No man has the power to retain, well, let's say right there, for he does not know what is to be, for who can tell him how it will be? It's very, very hard to navigate political matters, and he's just owning up to that. So now we're on to the next associated thought. No man has power to retain the spirit or power over the day of death. You have no idea when you're going to die. There's no discharge from war. If war is coming to your doorstep, you're in war, right? Nor will wickedness deliver those who are given to it. If you think you're going to be absolutely the most evil, mafiosa, Colombian drug cartel member, in order to escape death and escape war, you can become more evil than the guy next to you, and more evil until nobody will even come close to you. And that's the reasoning behind some of these cartel guys that become more and more twisted. And they think as they're doing that they're almost, by becoming the most evil guy on the block, that they're safe. And what he's saying is, wickedness will not deliver those who are given to it. No man has the power over the day of death, again, going back. So the author is saying, you might think you're clever, but when it's your time to die, you're going to die. All this I observe while applying my heart to all that is done under the sun. When man had power over man to his hurt. I can't get over the number of people, somebody who really lashed out at me and attacked in like a really surprising way in recent months. And this man, the last correspondence that we had, I wrote him very nice things, and I knew this person, and I said very nice things to him, and I tried to like be a friend to him. But this man was absolutely racked with the agony over what people were doing to people. He just couldn't handle it. And he was just like, I can't handle the injustice on the face of the earth right now. And he just like fractured all of his relationships that I could see. And I was one of the ones on the chopping block. And he was looking under the sun, right? But what do we have like in the story of the New Testament that is so different than everything you're seeing right here? We have the stories of all the early Christians who went to their death because of the machinations of, let's say, the Pharisees or the machinations of the Romans, whatever it might have been. They looked at people conspiring to take them out, and they submitted themselves. And we even have, I forget the name of the man who was martyred up in, I think it was Smyrna. I forget the exact city, but the story goes that this early church father, they tied him up and they said to him, we're going to give you the chance to recant and turn your back on God. He didn't come up with this worldview where he was going to become more wicked. And they said, if you recant, you're 86 years old. If you recant, we won't kill you. And he says, I won't recant. And so they set the wood at his feet. They lit all the wood on fire, and the wood half burned him to death. And he just wouldn't turn his back on Jesus. And so one of the Roman soldiers went over and in mercy actually strangled him so that he would die because he was half burnt. What a horrific way to go. But the final testament out of his mouth was, there is a day of judgment where there will be eternal fire. And he said, but I'm going on to glory right now. But I feel for all of you, because that day of judgment, that's an unquenching fire. And who knows but that people who were there in that crowd heard him. You know what I mean? He had faith in that moment that he was going on to a beautiful thing. It's so different than this author, right? Because I have to remember the name of that church father, because he was looking above, and this author is looking under the sun, right? So let's go on. Does someone want to read verses 10 through 13?
I'll read it. Then too I saw the wicked buried, those who used to come and go from the holy place and receive praise in the city where they did this. This too is meaningless. When the sentence for a crime is not quickly carried out, people's hearts are filled with schemes to do wrong. Although a wicked person who commits 100 crimes may live a long time, I know that it will go better with those who fear God, who are reverent before him. Yet because the wicked do not fear God, it will not go well with them, and their days will not lengthen like a shadow. Was that it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So does anyone want to jump in there?
So it says, those who used to come and go from the holy place and receive praise in the city where they did this. Are they talking about the Pharisees of Jesus' time?
That's okay.
But like the people who were like the high priests, were they wicked?
Well, so it's interesting because when it says the holy place, I've doubled back to Deuteronomy 1:17. I'm going to read this in answer to your question. You shall not be partial in judgment. You shall hear the small and the great alike. You shall not be intimidated by anyone, for the judgment is God's. In the case that is too hard for you, you shall bring to me, and I will hear it. This is Moses when he is appointing judges who would administer underneath him to really deal with the matters of the land. Again and again through the book of Leviticus and Deuteronomy, we have people who are judging, and they're serving it's a position. Like when you're just arbitrating over the matters of men, there's something holy about it. And so what we see right here is they used to go in and out of the holy place and were praised in the city where they had done such things. So the holy place could be wicked leaders who would go in and out of, like, let's say the court systems. And they were they were going in and out of the court system. It could literally be a holy place, like it could be God's temple or something of that sort. The point is that they're in lofty positions of authority, and they're going in and out, and they die. And when they die, they were praised in the city where they had done such things. I go back to the description of Mao Zedong. I'm really interested in it because in the period of the Great Leap Forward and all the different things that happened in China, my father has a really good friend who's a missionary in China right now, and he's married to a woman who is Chinese. And they talk about the persecution of the early church was so horrific. We have no idea how many millions of people died. They estimate up to 60 million people were killed, many of whom were Christians. We don't, again, know the numbers. But when Mao Zedong finally died, Time magazine ran a glowing article on him. And all world leaders were talking about how he helped the Chinese escape poverty and this, what on earth are we doing? Praising Mao Zedong. You look at the wicked in the land, the Italians in Italy, they blow my mind because the mafia dons are held in this strange world. There's the priests, and somehow the mafia dons, they'll slit your throat and kill you if you creep into their business model, but they're also beloved. It's a weird thing. I have a friend who lived in Napoli, in Naples, and he said it was such a strange thing because they would go in and out of the churches, the highest level mafia guys, and yet they were killing people. And then when these mafia guys die, they're given these huge, it's almost like a patron saint. It's so bizarre. And he's looking at this and he's like, this is vanity. It's clearly something that to him is he sees it happening, and he's like, I think the author, I'm going to go to Psalm 49:17. You don't need to go there. I'll just flip there quickly. But it says, Psalm 49:17, for when he dies, he will carry nothing away. His glory will not go down after him. And he's kind of reflecting on that. He said, all that vain glory, and he's not even going to take it with him. The next verse, because a sentence against an evil deed is not executed speedily, the heart of the children of man is fully set to do evil. So we went from despair over the political leaders. Now he's really talking about the judicial leaders that are corrupt. And because they don't carry out on a sentence and let something just linger, the sense of consequence in society is kind of evaporated. And never has that been the case more than right now. And I heard a very sad story about a man in California recently who he was just describing how his best friend was killed. He went out to his car. There were a few people underneath the car who were cutting off the catalytic converter. And he just walked up to his car and he thought that he didn't know what was going on. And they just pulled out guns, blew him to pieces. And the guy's body was in the driveway. This man in California, the thing he was so upset about is that the people who were finally caught, who shot his best friend, the people who were finally caught, had been caught so many times before. And they were in jail, and they were out again, in jail, out again. And we see right here, because the sentence against an evil deed is not executed speedily, the heart of the children of man is fully set to do evil. There's a cause and effect to not putting criminals away. Criminals need to serve their time. It sounds merciless, and it's not. there are many people who are not walking the earth right now because someone should have been serving a sentence, but mercy threw them out on the streets again. Then it says, though a sinner does evil 100 times and prolongs his life, yet I know that it will be well with those who fear God because they fear before him. So again, he's looking out under the sun, and then he comes up for air. And he's like, at first he's questioning women in his relationships. He's questioning political leaders. He's questioning judges. Then he questions God's divine justice. And he's saying, God, I'm looking out. There are really bad people walking the earth. You're not taking care of them. God, are you doing your job? Like, it's not fair. Why is it that so many bad characters get to walk around and they hurt the good? And so flip with me, if you will, for a moment, over to Matthew chapter 13. And does someone want to read Matthew chapter 13, verses 24 through 30?
Another parable he put forth to them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went his way. But when the grain had sprouted and produced a crop, then the tares also appeared. So the servants of the owner came and said to him, Sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have tares? He said to them, an enemy has done this. The servant said to him, do you want us to go and gather them up? And he said, no, lest while you gather up the tares, you also uproot the wheat with them. So they both grow together until the harvest. And at the time of harvest, I will say to the reapers, first gather together the tares and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn.
It's just such a powerful passage. And I have to say, this is a passage for me, for Kevin McAvoy, because I look out and I guess, we're all born with different dispositions, but there's something inside of me that really groans at injustice. I don't like to see innocent people get hurt, and I hate to see violent, evil people out there just getting away with it. And the thing time and time again that God has shown me is, Kevin, you know nothing, because there's a day of judgment coming, and I will judge everyone for what they have done. I'm going to judge them. Kevin, you're an idiot. You don't actually know what's going on, and you don't know who between here and the grave is going to find me. So if you were on the streets of New York City in the early 1960s, you would have seen a little Puerto Rican guy who was someone who just slit people to pieces. We don't know the crimes that he committed. He was bad. He was one of the most violent gang members in New York City. And a pastor would go up to him, and he threatened the pastor. He said, I'm going to basically slice you to pieces because you're a white guy in the middle of our ghetto. And the pastor said, every single piece, that if you slice me up, every single piece of me will say that Jesus loves you. What's that?
That's my Pastor Dave Wilkerson.
Yeah, it's Pastor Dave Wilkerson. Yep. And so the cross on the switchblade, and I got to hear Nicky Cruz in person. I went to a church service, and Nicky Cruz shared how he was a gang member, and he was out there on the streets. We don't know the crimes. He doesn't go into specifics. He was the worst criminal out there. I would want to see him deported. I would want to see him in prison. I would want to see him in prison and having his, the other inmates just make an end of him, because he was such a beast of a human, right? And then I pause and I read this, I'm like, but God is the judge. Now, it doesn't mean that the authorities don't have to do anything. The authorities have what we established before. There's an oath that God has with the authorities, right? But I surrender this to God, and God says, Kevin, you're willing to see Nicky Cruz die, and you don't even know that he's a future pastor. And I'm going to use him to bring tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, you could say at this point it'd be millions of people have heard the message of Jesus through Nicky Cruz's life. And so God says to Kevin, you're not the judge. I got it under control. And if I sent you out into the field to gather up all the weeds, you pull out the good plants with it. So let it be. I'm in control. And then I look to God and I naturally say, like the author of Ecclesiastes, like, it's not fair. But with Jesus' words right here, I say, but I trust you. And can you use me then in the building up of your kingdom? This passage starts out, Jesus put another parable before them, Matthew 13:24. The kingdom of heaven may be compared. We're talking about the kingdom of heaven. So we can wake up every single morning and lift our hands into God. We can say this, like the author of Ecclesiastes, it doesn't seem fair. I don't get it, and it's painful, and I hate to see innocent people hurt. But Jesus, like you said, I don't know, and I'm not the judge. Can you use me in the kingdom of heaven? And I'll just share my own personal testimony of when I was a boy, I got jumped by a gang. I was 15, and they beat me up really bad, and I was really scared for my life at one point. And one of the gang members rescued me and sent me off. So he rescued me from his own pack. And I was very bitter for a while afterwards, but time went by and God spoke to my heart and just said, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. And more time went by. And the impetus to go to the jail and work with inmates actually came from getting jumped by inmates, where God showed me that there was a great need, you know what I mean? And so I've had the chance to go into jails, work with MS-13 gang members. I don't even know what gang members they are. I just see all the symbols all over their faces and everything. And they will talk about things that have happened in their life. And with 100% of the young men that I've worked with through the years, I've been able to, in teaching them art lessons, I've been able to share with them about God. It's been, because I don't know what a weed is, and I don't know what the tares are. Only Jesus knows. So that's what I come away from Ecclesiastes with. I'm like, Ecclesiastes, thank you for being so honest, because otherwise I would think I'm the only negative guy out there. But Jesus, thank you. Because Ecclesiastes is looking under the sun. But Jesus said the kingdom of heaven can be likened to. So with that, we're right at 8 o'clock. I promised myself I wouldn't go over.
Did the pastor actually say, if you cut me in pieces, every single piece was like
he
Jesus
did.
loves you?
Yeah.
That was my pastor for 25 years.
Oh, he was your pastor.
Yeah.
You went there.
Yeah,
the
right
Times
from the
Square church.
start, yeah.
Right from the start?
Right from the start.
Ingrid, that's so cool. Wow. I never got to hear him speak.
He sounds like a fun guy.
That's
And then
really
all of a
cool.
sudden- and then,
What did he say?
his brother, they started Teen Challenge as well. No, because when he was very young, he was 19 when he came. God sent him to the gangs,
Yeah.
and he went into court to stand up for them. And so, Nicky Cruz at that time, he had a really rough, demonic life. And, he was, well, if I'll kill you. I'll kill you, I'll cut you in pieces. And he just said, well, then every piece is gonna still cry out and love you, So, they beat him up a lot. He was beat up
Yeah.
frequently, yeah.
Yeah. It's such an amazing story because
Yeah.
Nicky Cruz came, if you hear his story, so those gang members were guilty of a horrific crime. And Nicky Cruz, then you got to know his story a little bit. Nicky Cruz, when he was a boy, his mother was a Satanist. And so she was a high witch in Puerto Rico. And his last memory of being in the house, he had dark stories of it's the whole world of Santeria and witchcraft and whatever that stuff is. And his mother took his head and smashed his head against the wall, and blood just went over the entire wall. And he ran out the front door of their little hut in Puerto Rico, and he never looked back. And he hated his mother. So he's on the streets of New York City, just bringing death everywhere that he went. He meets David Wilkerson, the pastor. He accepts Jesus into his life. He is radically transformed. I mean, most beautiful story. He goes back to Puerto Rico, to his mother's hut, where she is still a Satanist in the village, and she's dying. She's right on her deathbed, and he says, Mom, I'm here to tell you that Jesus has saved me, and he's come into my life. She hears him out. She converts. She becomes a Christian. He prays over her, and she's healed. And she goes on to live many more years. And then the whole family in this village in Puerto Rico, everyone heard that the Satanist, the high priestess, became a Christian. And so then a lot of people in that village became Christians. It's just like, God knows who the wheat and the tares are, and it's not our place to judge. I just love it so much.
People ask me, I don't understand about God, like, why, if he's so good, why does he allow evil to exist? And that's the same thing that he said to me, he's long-suffering.
Yeah.
You don't know on your deathbed in that prison whether it could be the worst, child molester, horrible, horrible person. But even we don't see ourselves, we don't see our what we consider small sins, that's significant. So we measure them,
Right.
but it's all sin. There's
Right.
no measurement, it's all sin, and God was willing to wait. And
Yeah.
then, you have to leave everything in his hands because he knows best, whatever happened to someone. You don't know that he wasn't there, what he did for them after. He's always there.
Yeah.
So he oversees everything, so, yeah.
And that's we can fast forward to the end of the passage. I didn't get to the end of chapter 8. But he says, if you try to look into all the dealings of humanity, all the dealings of men, you can't. That's the last part of the chapter. You can't keep tabs on everything going on. If, like, I said to you, like, okay, Evan, you have to really keep track of what's going on in isolate politics. You'd be like, well, these politicians, they met for dinner. The town of Islip, you couldn't handle all the machinations and all the backroom deals and stuff like that. And that's what Solomon says. And Solomon literally says, I give up. I give up. I can't keep track of all the dealings of humanity. That's where Ingrid, what you're saying is, when you take it and you just say, God, you are the judge.
Yeah.
Can you just use me in your kingdom? And when we come with that attitude, we don't have to be keeping track of every piece on the chessboard of the nation and things of that sort. It's not a cry, it's never a cry for apathy, but it's rather a place of surrender and saying, I'm not the judge. Can I be useful to you, God? So with that, let's close with the word of prayer. Lord, I thank you so much for your word. I say the same thing, Lord. I pray the same thing to you every week, Lord. It truly is a lamp unto our feet and a light unto our path. Lord, as your word says, we hide your word in our hearts so that we won't sin against you, Lord. And Lord, we pray that we would have ears to hear, Lord, what you shared tonight from your word, Lord, what you brought to light from your word, and that we'd have, Lord, feet to just go forward this week and to bring the light of your word everywhere that we go, Lord, that we'd be faithful, Lord, in all of our dealings with everyone around us, Lord. God, we need your Spirit in our life, and we just pray that your Spirit would richly indwell us so that we would look more and more like you, Jesus, everywhere that we walk. That people would look at us and say, hey, that person, the light of their face, the countenance of their face shines. Because, Lord, like Moses, we've been in your presence. In your name we pray. Amen. I'm going to go hit the button.